There's a reason why people underestimate you, why they interrupt you, challenge your patience, push your limits, and question your worth. It's not due to weakness, it's because you appear non-threatening. You reveal too much too soon. You care too openly. You seek approval before you command respect. And in a world ruled by Machiavellian dynamics, being liked without being feared is just another way to be overlooked. The world doesn't fear kindness, it fears the unknown. You've been conditioned your entire life to present yourself as a good person, smile more, stay open, be friendly. First, remain approachable. But here's the truth. Goodness isn't respected, it's exploited. Because the more someone can predict you, the easier you are to control. Machiavelli understood this. His writing wasn't to soothe, it was a warning. A leader who isn't feared is always at risk. That doesn't mean becoming cruel. It means becoming unreadable. In a room filled with noise, the person who says nothing commands the most attention, not because people expect humor, but because they sense something they can't explain. The aim isn't attention, it's caution. If you're not perceived as a threat, you're treated like a tool. Think about your own life. How often were you overlooked until you walked away? How many only returned once you went silent? How many people honored your boundaries only after you enforced them with distance? That's because you were playing by kindness while they were playing for power. They knew you'd clarify, forgive, stay, be the first to apologize. You'd never escalate. And once they realize that you've already lost, they escalate first. They win. Machiavelli saw this in politics. You witness it in your relationships at work and at home. People don't test those who feel dangerous, they test those who are emotionally accessible. Because they know empathy will hold you back before pride ever does. But once you become a quiet threat, they pause before speaking. They adjust their tone. They tread more carefully. They hesitate to offend. Why? Because now you might not growl, but you might bite. That's the influence of the unspoken. They're watching to see if they can provoke you. That's how they gauge their control. Can they make you flinch? Justify yourself, chase them. Soften your stance. Every time you do, you become safe. But when you don't, they start to fear you. And fear doesn't mean instability, it means mystery. Machiavelli knew that the moment people can read your emotions, they'll craft your future to suit their needs, not yours. But when they can't, they wait. They observe. They follow. You've spent your life trying to be loved first. Now try being feared subtly, not through threats, not by shouting, but through silence, through unpredictability, through the refusal to bleed on demand, because the man who walks in smiling is easy to forget. But the man who walks in with no need to speak, he becomes unforgettable. And presence always outlasts volume. Machiavelli. He never lifted a sword unless he had already secured victory through perception. Because in reality, it's not about who you are, it's about what others believe you're capable of. You don't need to be a danger. You just need to be perceived as one. And how do you achieve that without saying a single word? You manage your visibility. You direct your energy. You control the silence. Because in every setting, one truth holds people: fear what they cannot grasp, and they respect what they fear. Step 1, keep your hand close. The loud ones lay it all out, their goals, doubts, strategies, and emotional weaknesses. They talk endlessly. They prove themselves. They show off, and the more they reveal, the easier it becomes to defeat them. Machiavelli didn't advocate transparency, he taught concealment. He understood that once they can read you, they can replace you. But if they can't read you, they'll brace themselves for you. So you speak less, you react with restraint, you cloak your intentions not to deceive, but to steer how others interpret you. Because in a world obsessed with visibility, it's the undefinable ones that people can't stop thinking about. Step 2, avoid defending. Avoid explaining. Nothing dismantles strength faster than defensiveness. If you're criticized and jump to justify yourself, you validate the criticism. If they accuse you of being distant and you rush to explain, you reveal that their opinion matters more than it should. Every time you justify your actions, you send one message: you still have emotional access to me. Machiavelli wouldn't argue. He'd simply nod, offer a faint smile, and respond, "Noted." That's how you become a threat. You absorb everything and return nothing. Step 3, be deliberately inconsistent. A threat doesn't have to be forceful. It needs to be hard to predict. People don't fear what they understand. They fear what constantly shifts. Machiavelli might praise someone today and replace them tomorrow. Share a warm conversation, then go cold the following week. Extend kindness, then disappear with no warning. Why? Because nothing unsettles the human mind like unpredictability. And when the emotional ground feels unstable, control follows. You don't have to be harsh, just cryptic enough to keep people cautious. They won't dare to provoke what they don't understand. That's what modern language calls mystery, what Machiavelli knew as a strategic illusion. Step 4. Stay calm when chaos erupts. The sharpest intimidation, inner control amidst external disorder. When others gossip, stay silent. When they scream, blink slowly. When panic sets in, speak with calm. When insulted, offer a faint smile. It tells them this: you can't unnerve me. And if they can't rattle you, they can't move you. And if they can't move you, they start to fear what you might move next. That calm, that refusal to rise, is the moment you stop reacting and start radiating. You become the gravity in the room, the one they orbit. Machiavelli wouldn't argue. He would say one line and let the silence do the rest. When a conflict ends, say a single sentence. Don't waste breath on dozens of defenses during it. The fewer words you use, the more weight each one carries. And when people can't anticipate your response, they begin modifying their behavior before you even speak. That's not conversation, it's command. When most hear threat, they think violence. When they hear dominance, they imagine control. But Machiavelli understood something deeper. He wasn't focused on brute force, he studied influence through presence. The ones who carry the most fear in any room are rarely the loudest. They're the ones who remain still yet draw all the attention. It's far safer to be feared than to be loved if you're forced to choose. Not because fear turns you ruthless, but because fear compels people to honor your silence. You don't have to strike, you only need them to believe you might. That belief can outweigh any argument. Those who aren't seen as threats are treated as targets. Let's talk psychology. When people don't fear losing you, they waste your time. They speak over you. They take more than they give. They demand explanations. They ask for support without ever offering it back because your presence lacks perceived consequence. You're dependable, predictable, nice, accommodating. And in a Machiavellian world, those aren't virtues, they're vulnerabilities waiting to be tested. So what is a threat? Not a weapon, not screaming, not retaliation. A real threat is the silence that follows disrespect, the calm response to rumors, the emotional neutrality that confuses, your exit from a space and the way it lingers. That's what fear really is. And fear is leverage. You're no longer just a person, you're a repercussion. When people feel your withdrawal, when they sense you won't chase, won't argue, won't explain, they begin to associate your silence with a shift in their environment. You stop responding, they begin reflecting. You speak less, they analyze more. You don't appear, they notice. Your absence becomes a mirror. Not because you punish them, but because they suddenly realize, but without his validation, I don't know who I am anymore. That is psychological warfare. Machiavelli didn't need soldiers to instill fear. He needed silence, space, ambiguity. When people can't anticipate your move, they either step back or try to get back in your good graces. Either way you win. Build the wolf, kill the dog. There's a reason phrases like kill the dog in you or Machiavelli demands the wolf resonate. Everyone knows the pain of being the emotional dog loyal, when betrayed kind, while being mocked obedient even when invisible. And everyone dreams of becoming the wolf. What they miss is this: the wolf doesn't bark. He watches. And when he acts, no one sees it coming. That's your evolution. No barking, no explaining, no pleading. You calculate, you withhold, you let your stillness speak for you. The most unforgettable people are usually the quietest. Here's the paradox: the loud are noticed in the moment. Silent people linger in memory. Because when you exit a room, what people can't define is what they revisit the most. Why didn't he speak? Was that a test? What did that silence mean? They're stuck, not because you said too little, but because you left them nothing to resolve. And when there's no closure, the mind loops endlessly. That's where threat is born, not from what you do, but from what you might. You don't need to speak to command a room. True power isn't declared. It's felt through how you carry yourself, through what you don't reveal, through how you hold back when everyone else is scrambling to be noticed. Machiavelli wouldn't shout instructions, he'd observe. He'd allow others to expose themselves. Then, without a raised voice, he'd let the silence around his words become the most intimidating part. Want to become a threat? Build daily habits that leave people unsure of your reach. Habit 1. Don't react first. When someone says something offensive, manipulative, or triggering, pause. Others rush to respond, to argue, to prove a point. But not you. You blink slowly. You wait. Let their intensity break against your calm. Why? Because the first to respond is often seen as weaker. But the one who delays, that's the person whose next move everyone watches for. Machiavelli would rather someone wonder if he noticed than reply too soon. A pause isn't indecision, it's calculation. And people fear being outmaneuvered more than they fear confrontation. Habit 2. Speak with intention. Say less. Exit sooner. It may seem small, but it transforms how others perceive you. Speaking slowly signals control. Being brief signals self-worth. Leaving early invites curiosity. Most people communicate to be understood, but real power doesn't aim to be understood. It invites interpretation. You want others to wonder, was that agreement or a warning? Why did he walk out just then? Machiavelli unsettled people without ever raising his tone because he never stayed long enough to be predictable. And what isn't clear becomes unsettling. Habit 3. Use absence to increase presence. The most commanding individuals aren't constantly visible, but when they are, it changes the room. Why? Because they resist being too accessible. Exit social settings. Conversations, even digital spaces, before your presence becomes background noise. The loyal dog is always around. The wolf appears and disappears. And when the wolf vanishes, people ask where he went. That's how Machiavelli turns scarcity into strength. Be the one whose absence is noticed, not whose presence is taken for granted. Habit 4. Don't over-justify your decisions. You may want to clarify, to be honest, to explain. But Machiavelli knew each explanation chips away at your authority. You said no, let it stand. Change your mind, let it change. Chose to walk away. Don't return. No reasons, no soft packaging, no rationalizing your stance. Because once you explain, you invite argument. And once you're defending, you're no longer leading. You're negotiating. And a real threat never negotiates. They maintain emotional stillness in social dynamics. You'll see how people often test your emotional core. They'll say provocative things to prompt a correction joke about your silence, to coax a reaction, flirt, tease, or guilt you just to break that composure. Why? Because they sense it, that unreadable calm, and it unnerves them. They attempt to unravel it because if they can't, they're forced to believe you're stronger than they are. Let them believe. Smile. Watch. Step back. Because the harder they try to figure you out, the more power shifts in your favor. Machiavelli didn't simply act powerful. He practiced habits of restraint, deliberate control, and daily behaviors that quietly implied, you don't know what I'm capable of and you never will. But if you test me, you may find out. There's a narrow path between being mysterious and being overlooked, between commanding silence and being forgotten. His brilliance wasn't in choosing fear over respect. It was in understanding how to blend both. So even when you said nothing, your presence echoed long after. Fear without respect leads to rebellion. People who fear only will pretend to follow, but plot against you. They'll nod publicly, but sabotage you privately. Obey outwardly, but resent you deep down. This is temporary dominance. It holds people briefly, but fuels their desire to see you fall. Machiavelli recognized this. That's why he didn't just demand silence. He cultivated respect through unpredictability. Fear must be paired with restrained admiration. Not love, not popularity, but reverence, the kind that whispers, he has the power to destroy me, but hasn't. However, respect without fear invites entitlement. If they only respect you, they'll commend your leadership, trust your judgment, but eventually they'll overstep. They'll interrupt you. They'll expect your kindness by default. You'll be appreciated, but not monitored. And once people stop monitoring you, they begin to underestimate your range. The answer: tension. The strongest individuals carry a quiet tension with them, not chaos tension. That quiet message, you're kind but not a pushover, calm but not someone to manipulate, silent but aware. This tension makes others emotionally cautious around you because they can't gauge how much of you is genuine. And once they start calculating, they stop attempting control. How do you build that kind of tension? Machiavelli would say, be steady in control, inconsistent in expression. You're always grounded but not always warm, sometimes attentive, sometimes unreadable, sometimes faintly amused. Never angry, never passive, always composed but never fully accessible. That inconsistency keeps them uneasy. Give them one sharp moment, then vanish. You don't speak often, but when you do, it's exact. You resolve conflict with a single sentence. You end arguments with one calm phrase. You correct once, then move on. And then you leave. Exit the space. Leave the message unfinished. You don't restate your point, and that single moment lasts longer than 1,000 explanations. That's what creates enduring tension. Make them feel the absence of you without announcing your exit. Machiavelli would never plead for attention. He wouldn't threaten to walk away. Instead, he'd condition people to notice the silence when he's no longer there. You stop responding. You stop engaging. Your tone goes neutral. You leave early, quietly. No justification. No farewell. Just absence. And they'll feel it because your presence had worth they failed to recognize. Now they do, and next time they approach with caution. Let compliments pass without clinging. When you're praised, you don't glow. You don't brush it off. You don't reflect it back. You acknowledge it. You hold their gaze. Maybe offer a small knowing smile. But you don't need their approval to validate your worth. Why? Because accepting praise without dependency sends a chilling message you already know your value. Their words were polite, not essential. This is how you strike the balance. You allow people to admire your calm, but fear the mystery behind it. That tension, that's how Machiavelli would dominate today. The noisy get attention, the silent get remembered. He didn't seek control in the moment he aimed to echo in people's minds long after he left. Because true influence isn't about asserting power. It's about the kind of presence that lingers after you are gone. And the most powerful presence, the one that never needed to explain itself. Men forget the death of their father quicker than the loss of their inheritance. Now ask yourself, what kind of person must you become to feel like an inheritance when you walk away? Let's build that version of you methodically. Obsession isn't born from access, it grows from absence. People don't fixate on what they understand. They fixate on what felt within reach, but never fully theirs. That's how you become unforgettable, real enough to feel tangible, distant enough to remain elusive. You give them one glance, one comment that cuts deeper than expected, a calm that disturbs the emotionally unstable, and then you disappear. That disappearance becomes a loop they can't resolve. Strategy 1. Break their expectations. Most people expose everything in minutes, overly friendly, overly eager, overly transparent. You speak less, smile with restraint, share only what's necessary. You create such a stark contrast that people instinctively slow down around you. They shift their voice, their posture, even their breathing, not because you instructed them, but because your presence changed the pace. You've made an impression. Strategy 2, let them guess, then give them nothing. People will try to define you. He's intense. She's enigmatic. They're hard to read. Let them guess. Because once they start imagining, they start obsessing. They replay your silences, decode your expressions, invent meaning for the parts they can't reach. And you never correct them. Now their imagination is doing your public relations. And the more uncertain they are, the more they come back. Strategy 3. Exit mid-sentence, figuratively or literally. Most people crave emotional closure. They want explanations, tidy endings, a final word. But you end conversations just before they feel complete. You vanish just before they're ready. You offer silence right after they expect engagement. Why? Because that lack of resolution becomes a mental hook. They replay the moment over and over, trying to resolve what you left unfinished. That's how a fleeting presence becomes a lasting obsession. Strategy 4. Guard your inner life like it's sacred ground. When they ask what drives you, say, I'm focused. If they ask how you're doing, respond, always adapting. When they ask what you want, save it varies. You drop glimpses, not blueprints. Because the moment someone fully grasps your motives, they begin designing paths around them. But when your inner world feels protected like a locked citadel, they stop probing and start watching and wondering and thinking of you long after you've forgotten about them. Machiavelli's brilliance wasn't in being revered as a historical figure. It was in being remembered as a man who could have done anything but chose when, how, and if. That if is what sticks. That's what they can't shake. Now you've arrived at the highest tier where silence isn't a strategy, but your natural state. Where you don't suppress your emotions, you simply choose when, where, and whether they deserve to be seen. Machiavelli's final form wasn't aggressive, it wasn't loud, it was controlled. Because true power doesn't come from being feared. It comes from making people shift their behavior just in case you're watching. A man who can't be read can't be cornered. Once people figure you out, they begin to handle you. But once they accept they'll never truly decode you, they stop trying to dominate and start giving you space. Because now you've become unpredictable. And whatever is unpredictable becomes untouchable.